coming together again. It's great to see people because we need to recognize that we are brothers and sisters in Christ. And to be with God's people in faith and love is why we're here this morning. What does it mean to be God's people in faith and love? Let's consider what is happening in our world today. A global pandemic that started in China in November 2019, which created lockdowns around the world, and in many areas which opened up are now asked to be controlling themselves again. As of yesterday, we know the changes that are happening in some places. Right across the country, or right across the province, our social gathering circles are getting smaller. That is, if they aren't monitored. Very important that way. But when you think about it, that's not the only thing that's going on in our world. Fires. You've heard about the fires that are covering most of the western coast of the United States, which the smoke is blowing across the country and even visible in over the Atlantic Ocean and into Europe. But there's all the places that are having floods. Areas that have been flooded because of storms, and then areas that have never been flooded before. And then, of course, there's that problem called the economy. Economic problems being felt by countries around the world, in our country, in our province, in our communities. Why? Well, because of lockdowns, we can't go anywhere. We can't spend the money. We can't do the things that we normally do other than getting groceries and necessary items. We hear of businesses that are going to be closing or on the verge of closing, and this has led to much unemployment. And with no money, many families, instead of donating to food banks in the past, have now received assistance. Government financial support is helping many more people in order to keep the cash flow going. But this has also led to other problems, including drug addictions. It seems that there's something happening in every corner. What is prevalent about all of it is worry and fear of what tomorrow will bring. If I were to ask you, what are the concerns or activities you have in this moment, we might list some of those things mentioned above. But we might also have the concerns we have for schools being open and how effective online learning really is when we have people of all ages connected to and needing to engage each other and build up relationships. What are the things that we're wondering about and thinking about? We're aware that there have been saying that with all the things happening in the world, maybe we should be taking note of the signs of end times. But there is hope. And I think that's one of the things that we have to remember. There is hope. On Friday, I was in the grocery store and I was looking at this young mom who was snuggling with her 3-week-old baby. Beautiful, beautiful little baby. If this is the end times, what does life hold for that child and those families expecting now? There is hope. This too shall pass. Remember that God promises not to destroy the earth, and that we're called to live in faith and with hope for a better tomorrow. If we read that psalm that we shared together again, we are to give thanks and call on God and make known what God has done. So what has God done? The psalm writes that people turn to God for help in times of need. In order to experience His presence like never before, to remember the promise that God made. And what were those promises? Those covenants of years gone by. God promised that He would lead His people into the promised land, that He would keep God's laws and obey His teachings. But the problem was that we know that those laws and teachings were not always kept. This not only happened then, but it still happens today. People are turning away from God. The most important thing about it is God never turns away from us. God created people to live and love others, supporting each other in times of crisis and celebration. Here we are 6 months into a pandemic, and we wonder what is happening to our world and even question where God is. People are worried about what will happen, not if the second wave hits, but when. And we know that is happening in some parts of our country today. Many people are worried about how they might live into the future. And even are worried about how everyone will get home for Christmas. But I ask this, where is your faith? Where is God's by himself and the disciples close by. When he finished praying, he asked them, "Who do the crowd say I am?" Jesus wants to know what the word on the street was. It is, or in the synagogue, or the market. Wherever people gather, they want to know, what are people saying about that guy? You know, the fellow that fed a huge crowd of people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Jesus wants to know, what are people saying about him? And the disciples responded, "Well, some people think you're John the Baptist. Others think that you're the prophet Elijah come back. And still others are wondering who you really are." And the crowd would have known who John the Baptist was because he prepared the way for Jesus to come. They would have known who Elijah was because of the teachings and the prophecies written and known by the generations that followed. And the prophets of old, the ones whose words we read in the Old Testament, all focus on the coming of the Christ, the one who has saved his people as Lord. So when Jesus hears these stories about the people talking about on the street, what is he getting? General information about who he is or perceived to be. But who do you say that I am? He then points to the 12 closest to him and says, "Who do you think I am?" It's interesting when Jesus asks that question, he uses that little word called "but." He always uses that word, "but." And it's very important to know that word is used here. This little word changes the focus of the conversation from what the crowds have shared with the disciples. And they answer very easily, very quickly. Then he says, "But who do you say I am?" He introduces that phrase and that clause which contrasts what has already been mentioned. And he says, "Who?" And Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Christ of God." Well, Peter did not need to think about this. He didn't have to look it up on Google. He didn't have to consult the rest of the disciples. He didn't have to do anything. He just answered immediately. He says, "You're the Messiah. You're the Christ. You're the one whom God promised. You're the one whom God sent." Well, in these last weeks, we've had many times, a lot of time, to think and reflect and think and wonder. We've had time to ask, what if? What if you were sitting where you did not know anyone and one of the people asked, "Who do you think Jesus is?" How would you respond? For many of us, we would say, "Well, Jesus is God's Son. He's part of the Trinity. He's the Savior, the Teacher, Christ, the Messiah." But do any of these words answer your relationship with Jesus? Do they tell others who you are in relationship with God? In relationship with Christ? Just think about it. When you introduce someone that you know to someone else, you say, "This is so-and-so, first name. This is my friend, my wife, my husband," to show your relationship with them. So I ask, who do you think Jesus is? How would you respond? Jesus is my Savior, my Lord, my teacher, my friend. Jesus listened carefully to these words of Peter and his disciples, and then he told them, "Don't tell anyone." I find that so funny. Here's Jesus saying, "What's the word on the street? Tell me everything you guys all know. Who do you think I am?" Don't tell anyone. Well, obviously the disciples didn't listen. We know who Jesus is. Because Jesus didn't want the disciples to tell anyone because he knew the kind of death he had to experience. And the disciples didn't really want to hear that Jesus was going to die. They didn't really get it until he died. Jesus tries to explain what his relationship with him would mean and does mean. He says, "If anyone wants to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross daily and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will save it." What does he mean? Jesus is telling the disciples the means by which he's going to die on the cross. They don't understand at that time, but we've heard the story of Christ, what happened after his arrest. And as he walks through the streets of Jerusalem on the way to Calvary, cross be? For our understanding, to take up the cross means to live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. To walk the way Jesus taught and to live as he lived. In a reading from Philippians, Paul wrote this, you need to stand firm in your spirit, and that is the Spirit of God. Strive side by side with each other and be of one mind for the faith of the gospel. And don't be intimidated by others who oppose you. How often do you others ask you about what is happening in the world and questioning how God can let all this happen? What do you say? Oh. God has given us a privilege and a responsibility as faithful followers of Jesus Christ. The privilege is not only believing in Jesus, but suffering for him and with him as well. So what are we suffering from in these moments? We seem to be fed, have clean water, close to where a place to gather and worship, and the ability to be with friends whose focus is Jesus. Yet many of us are anxious and we worry. One thing that we can do is to learn to wait to worry. Just think about it. Many of your anxieties are based on what you're thinking or imagining, not facts. If you wait until you actually have a reason to worry, then you can do something about it, but not what might happen. Jesus knew that he was going to die on the cross. He tried to tell the disciples that he would die on the cross. And no doubt he was anxious about this. But he also knew it was not yet time to have them begin to worry about it. He still had a lot of stuff to do. He had a lot of things to teach, a lot of things to say. He had more miracles to perform. He had a lot of things to do, and he didn't want the disciples to worry about how Jesus would die. So when he worried, he prayed. He prayed, and he prayed, and he prayed. And he worried, but it was through prayer that his anxieties and concerns were shared with God, just as what we're supposed to do as well. Charles Spurgeon wrote, anxiety does not empty tomorrow of its sorrows, but only empties today of its strength. Anxiety does not empty tomorrow of its sorrows, but only empties today of its strength. We do not know what the next few months will bring regarding the world and its people. All we do know is that we can rely on Jesus to help us through these days. Our faith enables us to turn to God for strength each and every day and to have hope for tomorrow. Paul stated in his struggles of the people of the church in Philippi. He tells them, live your life in the manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Live for Jesus. Well, how do we do this today? And it's all the things that seem to influence and tear the world and its people apart. We strive to please him in all that we attempt to do, all that we try to do, to follow him and submit ourselves to him, searching for others who need to know about him. And he's shared what our life is all about. Living for Jesus is like how he lived, by praying and caring and sharing of oneself. It means listening to the needs of others and showing compassion. Praying for those who need to be comforted and strengthened. Giving of ourselves in the service of others. It is the response we make after we say we believe that Jesus died and rose again for us. It means that Christ lives in us and we live in him. God hears these words as we offer them every single time. So let us remember this as we are called to live for Jesus, to renew our faith as we live for Christ in all that we say and do. An older hymn is called Living for Jesus. The words that I want to share with you, I'm going to sing the song for you because it may not be familiar, but I'm going to sing part of the song for you. It's the chorus part. It says, "O Jesus, Lord and Savior, I give myself to thee, for thou and thine alone didst give thyself for me. And And I'll continue reading that and singing it for you at this time. And as we share it, I'm going to ask you to pray